Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being truly well-informed. Today we're digging into something, well, incredibly common but also really misjudged, daydreaming. And we're not just talking about your mind wandering off for a second. No, we're looking at a hidden world that for some people becomes this profound challenge. We're exploring maladaptive daydreaming. It's a term you might be hearing more about in mental health discussions. So, our mission today, to unpack what maladaptive daydreaming actually is, how it's different from just, letting your mind drift. The really deep reasons it affects people, what it genuinely feels like, and importantly, what the latest research tells us about understanding it and maybe managing it. So here's the question. When does that pleasant little mental escape turn into something that really starts messing with daily life? Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, and it's really important right off the bat to realize that not all daydreaming is the same thing. Not at all. Mental health folks actually talk about a few different kinds. There's mind wandering, immersive daydreaming, and then the one we're focused on, maladaptive daydreaming. Mind wandering. That's just the brain doing its thing, Automatic, random thoughts. They just pop in and out. Fleeting. Doesn't really take effort.
Right, like when you suddenly realize you haven't heard the last 5 minutes of a meeting.
Exactly. That's probably mind wandering. Then you have immersive daydreaming. Now, this is different. It's much more focused, more detailed. It often has a storyline, a narrative quality. People describe it like being in a flow state, totally absorbed, or like having a movie playing inside your head. And the key thing here is this kind of immersive daydreaming. It's not necessarily a problem. Some people are naturally very good at it. It can be super creative, even helpful.
Okay, so that sounds pretty positive, actually. Where does it tip over?
It tips over into maladaptive daydreaming when that immersive quality, it gets out of control. It starts negatively affecting other parts of someone's life. It becomes less of a tool and more like a compulsion, almost like an addiction. And it's really that addictive quality, that need to escape into the daydream rather than the daydream itself, that causes the problems. It's often this misdirected attempt to meet real needs.
Okay, so addiction.compulsion.needs. That's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Given those distinctions, how can someone listening maybe get a sense if their own daydreaming is crossing that line? Like, what are the signs?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because the real difference for you listening comes down to distress and impairment. Is it causing you trouble? Research has actually helped boil this down to 3 core questions that can sort of flag if it might be maladaptive daydreaming.
Do it.
First, do your daydreams give you this really intense pleasure, so much so that you find yourself really wanting to daydream, maybe more than doing other things? Second, do you find yourself doing repetitive movements when you daydream? Things like pacing, rocking, maybe small hand movements, or other physical things that kind of help you get into it.
Interesting, like a physical trigger.
Exactly. And the third one, does your daydreaming make you feel worried or distressed? Or does it actually get in the way of your work, your studies, your relationships, other important parts of your life?
So intense pleasure, physical triggers, and real-life interference or distress.
Yeah. And if you're answering a pretty strong yes to all 3 of those, research suggests it's definitely worth looking into whether it might be maladaptive daydreaming.
That's quite specific. And it points to this being a very real experience, even if it's not in the big diagnostic books yet. But that lack of official recognition, that must create huge problems for people trying to get help, right? Expert, what is the official status? Is it seen as, real by the medical world?
Well, that's the frustrating part. Currently, maladaptive daydreaming is not an officially recognized diagnosis. It's not in the DSM, that's the main manual in the US, or the ICD, the international one. Not yet, anyway.
Not yet.
Right. And this is a huge hurdle, because even though it's not official, there are literally hundreds of scientific articles published on it in peer-reviewed journals. We know it causes very real suffering. The term itself actually came from Dr. Eli Sommer back in 2002. So it's not brand new. It's been researched for a while.
Okay.
And it's definitely not psychosis. That's a really important point. People experiencing maladaptive daydreaming, they absolutely know the difference between their fantasy world and reality. But that lack of an official label, it means getting help can be really hard. Researchers have developed tools, though, like the Maladaptive Daydreaming Scale, the MDS-16. It's a 16-item questionnaire. It helps identify the symptoms, and it's actually been translated into, I think, 41 languages now, which shows the global interest. Some studies suggest a score over about 49% on that scale points towards potential MD.
And that difficulty getting help. We heard this one story. It's just heartbreaking. Someone spent $10,000, saw 10 different professionals, And they were just told over and over again that their daydreams were perfectly normal and adaptive, even though they felt their life was, and this is their quote, like a train speeding down increasingly rickety tracks.
Wow. Yeah, that really captures the desperation, doesn't it?
It really does, and it just underlines why getting this recognized is so critical, because it clearly makes it hard to function at work or school. It can absolutely lead to social isolation and problems in relationships. People dealing with this, they need help and support just as much as anyone suffering from any other mental health issue. It's not trivial.
Absolutely not.
So we've got a clearer picture now of what it is and the impact. But the big question, I think, for a lot of people is just why? Why does this happen, expert? What does the research say about the roots? What pushes someone into these really detailed inner world so intensely?
Yeah, the why is complex, but as you mentioned earlier, it often starts as a coping mechanism. That's a really common thread. For many, many people, it's an attempt to escape from something unbearable in real life, or maybe an attempt to meet a need that real life is not meeting.
Like what kind of needs?
Safety, love, connection, control, things that might be missing. The research is pretty stark here. More than half of people with maladaptive daydreaming had experienced abuse, neglect, or a stressful family life in childhood. So the daydreams become this refuge and escape from the pain of the real world, a place where they can finally create the safe and loving relationships they may not have otherwise. Interestingly, one finding was that parental divorce was actually linked to lower rates of MD in some studies. The reasons aren't totally clear yet.
Huh. That is interesting. So trauma and unmet needs are big factors.
Yeah.
What else?
Boredom, actually, especially starting in childhood. Sheer boredom can lead someone to rely more and more on fantasy to create stimulation, to build these narratives. And another huge piece is emotion dysregulation. Basically, trouble handling difficult emotions. People with MD often use their daydreams to escape from uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. But that constant avoiding experiences, trying not to feel the bad stuff, it can actually make the maladaptive daydreaming worse in the long run. It feeds the cycle.
Right, the escape becomes the trap. And you mentioned other conditions earlier. Does this mean MD is just like a symptom of ADHD or anxiety? Or is it more complicated? Like if you treat the ADHD, does the MD just go away? Or is it its own separate struggle?
That's a really good question. And yeah, it's complex. There are definitely high rates of what we call comorbidity, meaning it often shows up alongside other conditions. ADHD is a big one. One study found something like 77% of adults with MD also met the criteria for ADHD, mostly the inattentive type.
Wow, 77%.
Yeah. It's also often seen with anxiety disorders, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and some types of depression. Now, do they influence each other? Absolutely. But MD seems to have its own specific features, so treating the ADHD or anxiety might help. It might reduce the need to escape sometimes. But the actual habit, the compulsive daydreaming itself, often needs direct attention too. It's not always just a side effect.
Okay, so they're linked. But MD often needs its own focus and treatment.
Exactly. And there's some really interesting new research from just this year, 2024. One study found maladaptive daydreaming was a significant predictor of problematic Twitch use, the streaming platform, people using it for an escape or a sense of connection, much like the daydreams. Another looked at neurodivergent people, specifically those with ADHD and autism. It found that between 37 and 46% experienced MD.
Significant numbers.
Yeah, and the drivers seem to be things like trouble managing emotions, negative self-image, using fantasy to escape, low self-esteem, all things we've touched on. And other new research suggests things like being ghosted or high stress levels can actually trigger MD episodes. But it also highlighted mindfulness as something that might help protect against it.
Mindfulness.
Yeah.
Being present. That makes sense as an opposite force.
Right. So all this really paints a picture of how our inner worlds and outer stresses are tangled up.
Absolutely. Which leads us to, okay, how does all this feel on a daily basis for someone living with it? Let's try and step inside that experience for a moment, help listeners really understand this intense internal world. First off, the intensity. These aren't just vague thoughts. They're described as intense and vivid. They have detailed plots, characters that pop up over and over like in a TV show. And this duration, they can last for hours. I mean, one study found people with MD spent, on average, 57% of their waking hours daydreaming.
Half their waking life.
Yeah. Just imagine that level of internal focus pulling you away from the outside world.
Yeah.
And there's often this really strong urge to daydream, right? It's not just passive. And it's often linked to those physical movements we mentioned, compulsive or ritualized movement like pacing, rocking, hand movements. Some even talk out loud or embody their character's actions or facial expressions.
Mm-hmm. The physical connection is strong for many.
Music, too, apparently. It acts like an emotional soundtrack for the fantasies,
Yeah.
evoking, intensifying, and prolonging the feelings. It can also help shield from external distractions, kind of fast-track them into the story. Some people apparently avoid music unless they know they have dedicated time and space to daydream.
Yeah, music is a very common trigger or enhancer.
And all this internal focus, it inevitably leads to a disconnection from what's happening around them. Big surprise, right? It causes difficulty sustaining real-world attention. And here's something really counterintuitive. Stimulant meds like Ritalin, often used for ADHD, they've actually been shown in some cases to increase MD symptoms.
Yeah, that's a puzzling finding. Perhaps, as you hinted, it sharpens the focus, but directs it inward even more intensely for these individuals.
Could be. And there's this deep emotional and psychological investment in these fantasy worlds. They evolve over many years. People talk about them like episodes which need to be finished, much like an engrossing TV series. There's a real persistent craving, this need to get their fix. And if they try to stop, it can lead to irritation, physical sickness, and even daydream binges.
Like withdrawal symptoms almost.
Exactly. And then there's the shame. This seems huge. Almost all maladaptive daydreamers struggle with shame.
Yeah.
They feel ashamed of being addicted to fictional scenarios, ashamed of having stronger feelings for characters than for real people, ashamed that we can't just stop, even ashamed of the visible stuff like the pacing. And that shame makes it incredibly difficult to talk about, even in therapy.
That silence is so damaging.
It really is. Yeah. There was this account from a Reddit user that just laid it bare. They said their maladaptive daydreaming was greatly minimized when they had a robust friendship group or liked somebody romantically because, in their words, they were able to get the fulfillment I was looking for in real life. Simple as that. But when those real-life connections faded, they felt this deep sadness because they can't find that fulfillment in reality. And that pushed them deeper into the daydreams, which became a way of vicariously experiencing positive social interactions or exuding confidence in ways I'm unable to in reality.
That perfectly illustrates the compensatory nature of it. It fills a void.
Yeah, a painful void.
And the real-world consequences, as we've said, are really significant. We're talking about impaired daily occupational, academic, and social or interpersonal functioning. It impacts everything. It can also lead to increased distress and, for some, suicidal ideation. One study actually noted about 1/3 being at high risk for suicidal behavior. That's serious. And just think about the practical stuff. Over 60% of people in an online MD community said their grades suffered because of their daydreaming. It's not benign escapism.
No, definitely not. That picture is incredibly stark. The distress, the impairment, the sheer amount of life lost to it. But, and this is really important, despite all these challenges, there is hope, right? This isn't something people are just stuck with forever. The good news, and this is maybe the most crucial message, is that maladaptive daydreaming can be treated. Now, we have to acknowledge, because it's not official yet, there's no standard treatment protocol per se. But approaches used for similar issues offer real help.
That's absolutely right. There is definitely hope, and treatment is possible. Often, the approach is similar to how you treat any other behavioral addiction, focusing on that compulsive element. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, that's a mainstay. A therapist works with the individual to identify the thoughts and behaviors driving the MD and helps them learn healthier ways to deal with those thoughts and urges. Other things like motivational interviewing, which helps build motivation to change, and mindfulness practices, which help with staying present, are also really useful.
Mindfulness again, bringing focus back to the here and now.
Exactly. And there's also some exciting new work like this psychological formulation model of maladaptive daydreaming that came out recently, developed by Lucas and Bone, published in 2025. Think of it like creating a personalized map of someone's MD. It uses CBT principles to understand how it developed for that specific person, what keeps it going, and crucially, what the themes and emotional content of the daydreams are actually about. What needs are they trying to meet? This model, it was reviewed by experts like Eli Somer and people with lived experience, and the feedback was really positive. It helped people organize the complexity, facilitated personal insight, and fostered a sense of hope. It helps target the underlying issues, not just the daydreaming behavior.
That sounds really promising. Getting at the why for each person. And it's not just formal therapy, right? People are finding their own paths too. We heard about Alex, someone who really struggled, felt dismissed by therapists, and ended up developing his own 7-step method and 4 tricks. He actually claims it's helped a lot of people reduce their MD symptoms significantly. He has this maladaptive daydreaming survey, 17 questions, and the idea is to get people to write down specifically what their maladaptive daydreams are and why they think they manifested themselves.
Mm.
And apparently, just that act of writing it down and analyzing it, for many, it immediately diminishes their desire to enter into their maladaptive daydreams entirely.
Self-reflection and understanding can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah. So for someone listening who feels trapped in that shame you mentioned, what's maybe a first small step they could take, even before thinking about therapy?
That's a great question. I think one of the most powerful first steps, honestly, is just finding community, knowing you're not the only one. There are online forums, support groups, even just opening up cautiously to one trusted friend if that feels safe. Hearing "me too" can break down so much of that isolation and shame, that validation. It's huge. And often, feeling less alone is what gives people the courage to then seek out more formal help when they feel ready.
Reducing the shame, connecting with others, that makes total sense. And it circles back to something you said earlier. The goal isn't necessarily to stop daydreaming completely, because that ability to immersively daydream is a natural and beautiful part of who we are, potentially.
Exactly. For many, it's a source of creativity and resilience.
Right. So the real aim is more about addressing the aspects of daydreaming that make it maladaptive, bringing the daydreaming and real life back into a healthier balance, usually by tackling the underlying issues, those unmet needs that fuel the excessive escape.
Precisely. It's about regaining control and choice.
Okay, so wrapping up our deep dive today, the big takeaway seems to be that maladaptive daydreaming is this very distinct, often hidden, but really impactful experience. It's deeply connected to how we cope, especially with difficult experiences or unmet needs, and it absolutely deserves serious understanding and support.
Couldn't agree more. And the good news is, the field is moving forward. We're seeing that 2024 research making strides. There's the Dutch documentary, In My Head, Everything is Better, also called My Dark, Beautiful World, Raising Awareness. New online resources are popping up, like a French website, www.reveriecompulsive.fr. It really shows this growing global awareness and a commitment to helping people find that balance.
That progress is definitely encouraging, and leaves me with this final thought. We hear that many people who experience maladaptive daydreaming are often described as highly creative, intelligent people. So if this incredibly vivid internal world they build is functioning as an escape hatch from reality, what amazing things might happen? What incredible real-world experiences or contributions might they unlock if we can help them feel safe and fulfilled enough to step more fully into reality, bringing all that unique inner richness with them? Something to think about. We invite you, as always, to continue your own deep dive.